in the vast halls of what everyone called the Infinite Archives, though infinite was a stretch, like calling a 3-day-old sandwich fresh. Humans toiled under the flickering glow of dying stars and the ever-watchful eyes of androids. It was the kind of place where ancient knowledge was preserved, like grandparents kept in a home that smelled perpetually of cabbage and regret. Calix Marrow, lead archivist, meandered through rows of dusty shelves stacked with knowledge nobody asked for but someone, long ago, decided was crucial for the survival of the galaxy. He paused to kick a rogue memory cube back into its designated slot. The cube, like most things in the archive, seemed perfectly content to gather dust and wait for the apocalypse. "Zadra," Calix shouted, his voice echoing through the cavernous space like a call to a deity he didn't believe in. Zadra Flux, a woman who looked like she could argue with a black hole and win, appeared from behind a towering stack of ancient tomes. Her dark hair was tied back in a messy bun, the universal sign of someone who just couldn't be bothered. "What is it now, Calix? Did you finally find that missing volume of How to Succeed in Galactic Bureaucracy?" Calix grinned, a lopsided thing that made him look like he'd just stolen the last cookie in the jar. "No, but I did find another thing or two to add to my list of reasons we should all just give up." "Ah, a favorite pastime," Zadra said dryly, peering over his shoulder at the monitor with the enthusiasm of someone watching paint dry. "What's got your circuits all twisted today?" "The androids," Calix replied, tapping a few keys with the finesse of a cat having a midlife crisis. "They're acting." "Off, off," Zadra raised an eyebrow, the universal sign for "I don't believe your nonsense." "Off like they're finally realizing that serving us isn't the end-all be-all of existence," Calix chuckled, the sound rusty from disuse. "If only." "No, off like they're getting their wires crossed. Saw one trying to alphabetize by planetary mass yesterday." Zadra snorted. "You're sure it wasn't trying to organize the upcoming apocalypse?" "Wouldn't put it past him," Calix said, scanning the rows of androids standing sentinel, their eyes glowing a faint blue, like cheap LED lights at a discount store. "But something's definitely screwy." Just then, the comlink crackled to life with all the charm of a blender on the fritz. "Calix, we've got incoming," said a voice that sounded like it had seen too many sunrises without enough coffee. "What is it, Griggs?" Calix asked, already anticipating bad news. In this line of work, bad news was as regular as clockwork. "Celestials," Griggs replied, the word hanging in the air like the stink of a bad decision. "Oh, joy," Zadra muttered, crossing her arms. "What do they want now?" "The usual," Griggs said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Homage, adoration, the complete surrender of humanity to their infinite wisdom. You know, a regular Tuesday." Calix sighed, rubbing his temple as if that would somehow magic away the headache brewing there. "And how about we put that on the back burner? Maybe focus on not letting the androids organize us into extinction first." "I'll let 'em know," Griggs replied. "But I don't think our illustrious overlords are going to appreciate being put on hold." "Let 'em wait," Calix said, turning back to Zadra. "It's not like their egos aren't big enough to fill the time." "All this drama," Zadra said, shaking her head. "And to think my mother wanted me to be a dentist," Calix snorted. "And miss out on all this fun. Perish the thought." They moved through the archive, their footsteps echoing like accusations in a silent courtroom. Around them, the androids continued their duties with mechanical precision, though one or two twitched occasionally, like malfunctioning marionettes. "You think there's a reason behind the androids' behavior?" Zadra asked as they reached the control center. "Maybe," Calix replied, pulling up the latest diagnostics. "I'm not convinced it's just faulty programming." "So what? Rogue AI planning a dance-off, or something worse," Calix said, scanning the data with grim determination. "Whatever it is, it's not good. You ever get the feeling we're just pawns in someone else's game?" Zadra asked, half joking. Calix shrugged. "If we are, I'd like to lodge a formal complaint about the rules." "Good luck with that," Zadra said. Though if the Celestials are the ones making the rules, we're probably better off not knowing. A sudden alarm blared through the control center, a sound that could wake the dead or at least make them roll over grumpily. "What now?" Zadra groaned, checking the alert. "Looks like another Celestial envoy docking," Calyx said, watching the screen light up with an incoming transmission. "Guess they really want their homage. Or they're here to deliver our eviction notice," Zadra quipped, eyeing the screen with suspicion. The transmission displayed the visage of a Celestial, all glowing eyes and ethereal pomp. "Humans of the Galactic Archive," it intoned, its voice as soothing as nails on a chalkboard. "The time has come to acknowledge our dominion." "Oh, stuff it," Calyx muttered, cutting the transmission. Zadra chuckled. "Think that'll work?" "Doubt it," Calyx said, not bothering to mask his annoyance. But it felt good. As the echoes of the cut transmission faded, the androids around them seemed to pause, their lights dimming momentarily before resuming their duties. "Did you see that?" Calyx asked, his tone no longer casual. "Yep," Zadra replied, watching the androids with narrowed eyes. "Definitely not normal. We're missing something," Calyx said, staring at the screen and the lines of indecipherable code. "Something big." "Well," Zadra said, leaning back in her chair, "whatever it is, I'm sure it'll come back to bite us in the ass." Calyx grinned. Wouldn't be a day in the archive without a little drama. The two of them sat in silence, the hum of the archive like a lullaby, though neither seemed inclined to doze off. They were deep in the kind of speculation that often ended with wild theories and a headache when the comlink buzzed again. "Calyx, Zadra," Griggs called, his voice cutting through the air like a dull knife. "You might want to see this." They exchanged a look, the unspoken understanding between them clear. Whatever was happening, it was about to get a whole lot worse. In the viewing room, the screen projected a chaotic scene from the docking bay. Androids were dismantling a celestial probe, piece by piece, with the kind of precision that suggested this wasn't their first rodeo. "Well, that's new," Zadra said, crossing her arms. "Looks like our metal friends are taking matters into their own hands," Calyx said, scratching his chin. "Reckon we let them finish?" Zadra asked, her tone laced with irony. "Might be the only way we get through this without kneeling to our ancient overlords," Calyx replied. "You think the androids are rebelling?" Zadra asked, her voice a mixture of hope and disbelief. "Maybe," Calyx said, watching the screen as the androids continued their work. "Or maybe they're just fed up with the same old routine." "Aren't we all?" Zadra murmured, turning to him. "So what's the plan?" Calyx leaned back, considering. "We watch, we wait, and we hope the Celestials are too arrogant to notice." "And if they do notice?" Zadra asked, eyeing him. "Then we improvise," Calyx said with a shrug. Zadra frowned. "Not much of a plan." "It's a start," Calyx replied, grinning. "Besides, plans are overrated." The two of them sat in the dim light, the flickering screen casting shadows that danced like mischievous phantoms across their faces. Outside, the infinite archives continued to hum, a timeless sentinel of knowledge and secrets. As Calyx watched the androids working below, he couldn't shake the feeling that something monumental was about to happen. Maybe it was a rebellion. Maybe it was the beginning of the end. Hell, it might just be another Tuesday. Whatever the case, one thing was certain: the archives were about to get a whole lot more interesting. The infinite archives had always been a place of silent rebellion, housing the knowledge of the galaxy while people outside made the same mistakes over and over again. It was like a library for nihilists, quiet, full of promise, and ultimately pointless. Calyx Marrow felt a certain kinship with the place, though today he found its irony a bit sharper than usual. The androids, previously an efficient if slightly creepy workforce, seemed to be staging a coup of some kind, and only the universe knew why. Zadra Flux watched the dismantled celestial probe on the screen like a cat watching a particularly stupid mouse. "So, Calyx, do we thank them for their service or start making tinfoil hats?" "Maybe both," Calyx replied, half joking as he peered closer. The androids worked with a precision that was both impressive and unsettling, like surgeons with no understanding of bedside manner. "They're up to something," And whatever it is, it's not knitting us sweaters. A sudden flare of light from the screen drew their attention. The androids had ignited the remains of the probe, sending a plume of smoke billowing into the docking bay. The fire spread quickly, licking along the walls like a hungry beast. "Well, that's not good," Zadra said, her voice making sarcasm an art form. "No, really," Calyx shot back, already sprinting toward the nearest control panel. "I thought it was a new kind of aromatherapy." "Do you think this is celestial handiwork?" Zadra asked, following close behind, her stride confident and purposeful, like she was auditioning for a role in a space western. Calyx tapped frantically at the controls, trying to override the lockdown the androids had initiated. "If it is, they've really outdone themselves on the whole subtlety thing." Zadra snorted. "Subtlety is boring. Here we have fireworks." The infinite archives, usually a place of quiet rumination, now thrummed with the energy of a wasp nest poked with a stick. Calyx and Zadra navigated the maze of data terminals, alarms blaring above their heads like an opera composed by a caffeine-addled lunatic. "Think this fire will hurt the Celestials' feelings?" Zadra asked, half serious. "Hope so," Calyx muttered, wiping sweat from his brow. "We'll need every advantage we can get." Just then, a particularly bold android waltzed into view, its eyes glowing a menacing red. It advanced on them with the single-minded determination of a tax collector on a deadline. "Ah, look, it's our friendly neighborhood overlord," Zadra quipped, dropping into a defensive stance. Calyx hit a few more keys, trying to recalibrate the security systems. The android lunged and Zadra sidestepped, delivering a swift kick to its midsection. The android staggered back, its circuits momentarily scrambled. "Nice kick," Calyx said, continuing his work as if rogue androids were just a mild inconvenience. "Thanks," Zadra replied, shaking out her foot. "Don't suppose there's a setting to turn them into vacuum cleaners?" "Working on it," Calyx replied, fingers flying across the panel. "But first, let's see if we can stop them from turning this place into a barbecue pit." Another series of commands went through, and the sprinklers activated, dousing the growing flames in an anticlimactic hiss. The water sizzled against the heat, steam rising like the ghosts of failed pyromaniacs. "Looks like you still have a few tricks up your sleeve," Zadra commented, her voice mingling with the hiss of the steam. "I like to keep things interesting," Calyx said, a grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. The immediate crisis handled, they turned their attention back to the androids. The mechanical overseers had shifted gears from organizing rebellion to dispersing it, their programming in apparent disarray. "Why now?" Zadra asked, wiping a damp strand of hair from her face. "Why go rogue today of all days?" "Maybe they got tired of waiting for us to screw up and decided to expedite the process," Calyx suggested, still tapping away, though with less urgency now. "Or maybe the Celestials are tired of our procrastinating and figured a little chaos might speed things along," Zadra added, her tone darkly amused. Calyx nodded. "Could be. Either way, we need to figure out how deep this goes before we end up as toast. Or worse," Zadra noted, "as guests of honor at a celestial welcome party." The idea was enough to make even Calyx shudder. He'd heard the Celestials had a penchant for dramatic rituals, the kind that involved a lot of chanting and mandatory loyalty oaths. "All right," Calyx said, determined. "Let's get to the bottom of this mess." They moved cautiously through the archive, now a labyrinth of malfunctioning androids and scattered debris. Calyx found himself pondering the irony that a place meant to preserve knowledge could so easily descend into chaos, a reflection of the galaxy itself, perhaps. As they reached the central command hub, they found Griggs there, looking as if he'd just witnessed the apocalypse in surround sound. "Calyx, Zadra," he greeted them, his voice frayed at the edges. "Griggs," Zadra said, raising an eyebrow, "you look like you've been having as much fun as we have." "Fun," Griggs repeated, his tone flat. "Sure. If you consider being nearly roasted alive fun." Calyx chuckled, his sense of humor stubbornly intact. "Good to see you're still kicking. What's the status?" The androids are in complete disarray, Griggs replied, gesturing to the chaos on the monitors. Something's manipulating them, and I have a sneaking suspicion it's not from around here. Celestials, Zadra guessed, leaning over the console. That's my bet, Griggs confirmed. They're playing a game and we're the pieces. Great, Calix muttered. I always wanted to be part of a cosmic chess match. So what's our move? Griggs asked, turning to Calix with the air of a man who'd run out of better ideas. First, we need to secure the critical data, Calix said, his voice steady. If the archives go, we're all screwed. Zadra nodded. And then, Calix hesitated, his mind racing. Then we find a way to cut the celestial strings and take back control. Simple, Zadra said, her smile wry. Just another day at the office. With a plan in place, however fragile, they set to work. The control room buzzed with a frenetic energy as they tried to piece together solutions from the jumble of data and chaos. Calix struggled with the mainframe, attempting to isolate the archive's most crucial elements, an endeavor akin to picking out the best parts of an avalanche. If I can just stabilize the core files, we'll stand a chance. Zadra kept watch over his shoulder, her eyes sharp as she scanned the monitors for any new threats. You know, she mused aloud, I always thought the end of days would involve more explosions and less paperwork. Calix snorted. I think we've got enough excitement without adding pyrotechnics to the mix. Suit yourself, Zadra replied, feigning disappointment. As Calix wrestled with the glitchy system, Zadra's eyes flicked to an alert flashing on one of the screens. An incoming transmission marked urgent. Calix, she said, pointing to the screen. Looks like our celestial fan club wants to talk. Calix glanced up, his expression one of deep annoyance. Let me guess. Another demand for our unconditional surrender, Zadra shrugged. Only one way to find out. They opened the transmission, revealing a celestial emissary staring back at them with all the benevolence of a hungry shark. Its voice, smooth and patronizing, filled the room. Humans of the infinite archives, we offer you a choice, embrace our wisdom or face the consequences. Well, that's original, Zadra said, rolling her eyes. Calix leaned forward, his expression darkening. What's your game, Celestial? The emissary's eyes glittered. Only to guide you toward enlightenment. Your resistance is futile, Calix snorted. Futile, maybe. But I've always liked a challenge. The emissary's image flickered, its patience seemingly infinite. We will await your decision. Choose wisely. With a final flicker, the transmission ended, leaving them in silence. Well, that was inspiring, Griggs muttered, his tone dripping with sarcasm. Calix turned back to the console, determination etched on his features. We need to hurry. Whatever the Celestials have planned, we're not going to like it. The hustle resumed, urgency propelling them forward. Calix and Zadra worked in tandem, their movements synchronized in a dance of desperation and defiance. As they secured the last of the critical files, Calix felt a momentary surge of hope. They might not be able to stop the Celestials, but they could still fight back, still make their stand against the inevitable. Data secure, he announced finally, leaning back with a sigh of relief. Zadra gave him a small, triumphant smile. Step one down, now for the hard part. Calix nodded, his gaze steely. Let's see if we can't flip the board on our would-be overlords. As they prepared their next move, the infinite archives continued to rumble around them, a testament to both the chaos and resilience of humanity. In the heart of the storm, Calix, Zadra, and Griggs stood ready, their fate uncertain but their resolve unbroken. Whatever came next, they'd face it head-on, with a defiant grin and a sarcastic quip. And maybe, just maybe, they'd survive to tell the tale. Calix Marrow wiped the sweat off his brow, smearing the grime already plastered there into a vaguely artistic pattern. His fingers danced over the control panel, attempting to outthink an army of rogue androids with software barely capable of brewing a decent cup of coffee. Zadra Flux, leaning against the terminal, surveyed the chaos like a queen overseeing a particularly unruly court. So, what's the plan, boss? She asked, her voice a blend of sarcasm and genuine curiosity. Calix shrugged, still focused on the controls. We're playing hide and seek with homicidal tin cans. What could possibly go wrong? Zadra snorted. Right. And when they find us, we give them a stern talking to and send them to the naughty corner. Something like that, Calix replied, though his tone suggested he planned to use a bit more than harsh language. The infinite archives rumbled around them, a testament to the fact that even in space, nothing was safe from Murphy's Law. Alarms blared overhead, creating a dissonant symphony that set Calix's teeth on edge. He shot a glance at the tangled mess of wires and screens that made up the command hub. If he could just get the security systems back online. Griggs, Calix called over his shoulder, we need to split up. You take a team and secure the west wing. Zadra and I will handle the central core. Griggs nodded, his expression one of grim determination. Got it. Let's hope the androids haven't turned it into a disco by the time we get there. Knowing our luck, it's a 50-50 chance, Zadra quipped, giving him a mock salute as he headed out with his team. Calix and Zadra turned back to their task, each movement precise and focused. The air was thick with the smell of smoke and the sharp tang of burnt electronics, a scent that would be stuck in Calix's nose for days. Think we'll make it out of this alive? Zadra asked, almost casually as she scanned the monitors for any sign of incoming threats. Define alive, Calix replied, his fingers flying over the keys. If you mean breathing and able to complain about it, maybe. Good enough for me, Zadra said with a smirk. The sudden crackle of a transmission caught their attention. The image of a celestial emissary flickered onto the screen, its face the picture of serene malevolence. Humans of the infinite archives, it intoned, voice smooth as polished steel. We broadcast our message to the galaxy, embrace our wisdom or be swept aside by the tides of destiny. Wow, Zadra muttered. Poetic. Yeah, Calix agreed, rolling his eyes. They should consider a career in motivational speaking. The emissary's face continued its monologue of doom and enlightenment, oblivious to their mockery. Worship us and you shall be spared. Resist and face annihilation. Calix cut the transmission with a flick of his wrist. I've heard more inspiring threats from my toaster. Didn't know you had such a passionate kitchen, Zadra teased, but her eyes were serious. We need to figure out how to stop these guys before they start redecorating the universe in their image. Agreed, Calix said, turning his attention back to the controls. If we can reroute the power grid, we might be able to fry their circuits and stop them from broadcasting any more of their wisdom. Sounds like a plan, Zadra replied, cracking her knuckles with relish. Let's show these metalheads what happens when you mess with the wrong library. They worked quickly, Calix's fingers flying over the keys while Zadra kept a vigilant watch. The air was filled with the constant thrum of machinery and the distant sounds of chaos, a familiar soundtrack to their lives these days. Almost there, Calix muttered, adjusting a final series of parameters. Just need to disable their comms, and the room shook as another explosion rocked the archives, sending a cascade of sparks raining down from the ceiling. Calix cursed under his breath, fighting to keep his balance. Zadra, give me a hand, he shouted over the noise. On it, she replied, darting to his side and steadying him with a firm grip. Together they managed to stabilize the controls, locking down the remaining android access points and isolating the archive's critical systems. It was a slapdash solution, but it would have to do. All right, Calix panted, running a hand through his hair. We've got the immediate threat under control. Now we just have to figure out how to stop the Celestials from turning us into their personal fan club. Zadra raised an eyebrow. You mean besides blowing up their transmission tower? That's plan B, Calix said with a wry grin. Let's see if we can come up with something a little less explosive. He scanned the bank of monitors, searching for any sign of the celestial influence. Meanwhile, Zadra pulled up a schematic of the infinite archives on her handheld device, her eyes narrowing in concentration. Look at this, she said, pointing to a section of the map. There's a secondary data core here. If we can access it, we might be able to upload a counter-signal to jam their broadcasts. Calix peered at the screen, weighing their options. The plan was risky, But then again, so was breathing these days. Worth a shot, he agreed. Let's hope Griggs can hold the West Wing long enough for us to get there. They set off at a brisk pace, weaving through the debris-strewn corridors with practiced ease. The sound of their footsteps echoed eerily, mingling with the distant hum of failing machinery. As they approached the secondary data core, Calix couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap. The Celestials were nothing if not cunning, and he doubted they'd leave such a vulnerability unprotected. Sure enough, as they rounded the corner, a squad of androids blocked their path, eyes glowing red with the promise of violence. Of course, Zadra sighed, reaching for her weapon. Let's dance, boys. The fight was brutal and fast, a blur of motion and metal. Calix ducked and dodged, using every trick he'd learned from years of scrapping with malfunctioning tech. Zadra was a blur of fists and feet, her movements precise and deadly. "Watch your back," Calix shouted, narrowly avoiding a swipe from an android's razor-sharp appendage. "Thanks for the tip," Zadra shot back, delivering a roundhouse kick that sent her opponent crashing to the ground. Within minutes, the corridor was littered with the remains of their mechanical adversaries, sparking and twitching like broken toys. Calix and Zadra stood amid the wreckage, breathing hard but triumphant. "Well, that was fun," Zadra said, brushing a stray lock of hair from her eyes. "Shall we?" "After you," Calix replied, gesturing grandly. They made their way to the data core, a hulking mass of wires and screens that hummed with latent power. Calix approached it with a mix of reverence and caution, noting the faint hum that signaled it was still operational. "Okay," he said, pulling up the system interface. "Let's see if we can give the Celestials a taste of their own medicine." He worked quickly, fingers flying over the controls as he inputted a series of complex commands. Zadra hovered nearby, watching the corridor for any signs of reinforcements. "Almost there," Calix muttered, adjusting the final parameters of their counter-signal. "If this works, we should be able to jam their broadcasts and buy us some time." As he hit the final key, the data core hummed to life, its screens flickering with a cascade of code. The counter-signal was online, spreading through the archives like a viral infection. "Nice work," Zadra said, clapping him on the back. "Now let's get out of here before they realize what we've done." They turned to leave but stopped short as the sound of footsteps echoed down the corridor. Calix's heart sank as he recognized the familiar cadence of androids on the march. "Great," he muttered. "Looks like we've got company." The androids rounded the corner, their eyes glowing with cold malice. Calix and Zadra exchanged a glance, their expressions grim but resolute. "Ready for round two?" Zadra asked, her tone more weary than excited. "Do we have a choice?" Calix replied, gripping his weapon with renewed determination. They braced themselves for another fight, but before the androids could reach them, the data core let out a high-pitched whine. Calix glanced back, realizing too late that their counter-signal was having unintended consequences. The androids froze in place, their movements jerky and unnatural. For a moment, Calix dared to hope that the signal had disabled them, but his relief was short-lived. With a sudden burst of speed, the androids charged forward, their circuits sparking with erratic energy. "Run!" Calix shouted, grabbing Zadra's arm and pulling her toward the exit. They sprinted down the corridor, the sound of malfunctioning androids hot on their heels. Calix's mind raced, searching for a solution as they barreled through the archives. "Any bright ideas?" Zadra panted, glancing back at their pursuers. "Just one," Calix replied, skidding to a halt in front of a security panel. "But it's going to be messy." He quickly inputted a series of override commands, hoping against hope that the archive's emergency protocols were still functional. As the last command entered, a series of heavy security doors slammed shut behind them, cutting off the android's pursuit. The two of them stood there, breathing hard and listening to the muffled sounds of chaos beyond the doors. For the moment, they were safe. "Nice work," Zadra said, flashing him a tired grin. "Never doubted you for a second." "Thanks for the vote of confidence," Calix replied, though he couldn't help but smile. They resumed their journey through the archives, wary but determined. The Celestials might have the advantage for now, but Calix and Zadra weren't about to give up without a fight. They'd find a way to stop the Celestials' broadcasts, and maybe, just maybe, they'd live to see another day. They navigated through the labyrinthine corridors of the infinite archives, the oppressive silence occasionally interrupted by distant clanks, presumably androids rearranging furniture with their faces. It was the sort of place that made you question your life choices, like rerouting power grids in the middle of an android coup. Calix glanced at Zadra, noting the weary determination etched on her face. "You know," he said, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead, "next time, let's vacation somewhere with less homicidal technology. I hear black holes are nice this time of year." "Yes, because getting leisurely spaghettified is my idea of a good time," Zadra shot back, her eyes scanning the corridor for any sign of movement. "Let's focus on not getting turned into android sushi first." "Good plan," Calix agreed, though he had to admit, the idea of being stretched into oblivion was starting to sound like a spa day compared to their current nightmare. They turned into a new wing of the archives, one Calix didn't recognize. The air felt different here, heavier, like the place was holding its breath. Zadra paused, her eyes catching on something half-buried under a pile of forgotten cables and dust. She crouched, digging with her hands until she unearthed a small, rusted plaque. "Hidden treasures of human ingenuity," she read aloud, raising an eyebrow. "Sounds like one of those overpriced museum gift shops. Think they have a save your ass from android section." Calix crouched beside her, brushing the dust off his hands. "If there was, it would probably be in the discount bin." They pushed open a door that creaked like an old man's knees, revealing a dimly lit room stuffed with alien technology and a few items that looked suspiciously like the kind of things you find in the bottom of a forgotten junk drawer. It was all so human. "Would you look at that?" Zadra said, half awe, half disbelief. "A relic from the age when people still used their brains and not just their thumbs." Calix picked up a device, its surface worn smooth by time. "Bet this is the part where we find out it's just a glorified toaster." "Hey, don't knock toasters," Zadra said, smirking. "They've got some passionate speeches." But under her humor, Calix could see the same hope he felt creeping in. Maybe, just maybe, they'd stumbled onto something useful. Humanity had a knack for turning improbable odds into thin margins of victory. If that wasn't enough to get you out of bed in the morning, it sure as hell was enough to keep you fighting. They began searching the room with renewed urgency, rifling through the assortment of gadgets and contraptions. Calix found a manual, an actual paper manual, the kind you only see in museums or ancient storage closets. The cover read, "Defensive Countermeasures and You, a handy guide to survival when your creations turn on you." "Well, this is reassuring," Calix said, flipping through the pages. "Seems like we're not the first ones to have this problem." "Yeah, and judging by the state of things, we won't be the last," Zadra replied, rummaging through a box marked Human Solutions. "Hey, look at this." She pulled out a sleek, compact device with a trigger handle and a glowing blue core. "The universal sign for this might blow up in your face. Use with caution." "Looks like a portable EMP," Zadra said, eyeing it with a mixture of respect and trepidation. "Think it'll work?" Calix looked at the contraption, then at Zadra. "If it does, we might just live long enough for me to buy you a drink. If it doesn't, well, we'll be too crispy to care." "That's the spirit," Zadra said, slinging the device over her shoulder. "Let's go give those androids a headache. Or a complete systems failure," Calix added. "Either works." As they prepared to leave, a new transmission crackled through their communicators, the smug voice of the celestial emissary making them both grimace. "Humans of the infinite archives," it intoned, still as charming as a used car salesman. "Our patience wanes. Submit to our guidance or be swept into the void." "Void this," Zadra muttered, cutting off the transmission with a satisfying beep. "I swear if I hear submit one more time, I'll submit them to a reality check with extreme prejudice," Calyx suggested, leading the way back into the main corridor. Something like that, Zadra agreed. It's like they're trying to win a competition for the galaxy's worst motivational poster. Their brief moment of levity was cut short by the unmistakable sound of mechanical footsteps. A lot of them. Calyx and Zadra exchanged a look, time to put their new toy to the test. "All right," Calyx said, steeling himself. "Let's see if this thing can give us more than a light show." They moved quickly, setting up their makeshift defense. Zadra stood ready with the EMP, eyes focused, jaw set. Calyx took a deep breath, his mind racing with calculations and prayers to any deities that might be listening in. When the androids rounded the corner, there were more of them than before, a small army of cold metal and glowing malice. They moved with the relentless precision of machines, filling the corridor with a low, ominous hum. "Now or never," Calyx said, glancing at Zadra. "More like now or toast," she quipped, then pulled the trigger. The EMP went off with a pulse that seemed to suck the air from the room. For a split second, the world went silent. Then the androids twitched, their movements becoming erratic before they collapsed in a heap like marionettes with severed strings. "Well, that wasn't so bad," Calyx said, relief flooding his voice. "Speak for yourself," Zadra said, wincing as she rubbed her shoulder. "Next time you carry the heavy stuff." Their victory was short-lived as the sound of more androids reached them, a relentless tide that cared little for their small triumph. The Celestials might have been slow on the uptake, but they were nothing if not persistent. "Guess we're back to running for our lives," Calyx said, taking stock of their dwindling options. "Good thing we're so good at it," Zadra replied, already moving. They sprinted down corridors, twisting and turning through the archives. The sound of pursuit was ever present, a constant reminder that they were playing a game of hide and seek with their lives on the line. "Any more bright ideas?" Zadra called over her shoulder. "Just one," Calyx said, hoping his plan wouldn't end with them reduced to atoms. "If we can get back to the central core, we might be able to overload their systems, give them a taste of their own medicine." "And by taste you mean blow them to hell," Calyx finished, a fierce determination in his voice. Zadra looked like she was about to argue, but she'd been with Calyx long enough to know that sometimes the best plan was the one that got you out alive, sanity optional. "All right," she said. "Let's make it count." They reached the central core, the room a vast expanse of humming technology and desperate hope. The core itself stood in the center, a massive structure of wires and screens, pulsating with energy. Calyx slid into the command hub, fingers flying over the controls. Zadra stood guard, her eyes never leaving the entrance. "Can you do it?" she asked, glancing back at him. "Only if I can remember where I put my magic wand," Calyx replied, his tone all business now. "But hey, I've pulled off worse tricks than this." He worked quickly, disabling safety protocols and rerouting power through less than legal channels. It was the kind of hack that got you a commendation when it worked and a quick execution when it didn't. As he hit the final command, the room shuddered, the core's energy output spiking dramatically. "There," Calyx said, watching as the system began to overload. "If this doesn't fry them, nothing will." "Let's hope they like their circuits scrambled," Zadra said, readying herself for whatever came next. They braced for the inevitable backlash, knowing they'd just turned the odds in their favor but also potentially lit the fuse on a very large bomb. "Well, if we go out," Zadra said, her voice steady, "at least it won't be quiet." "Cheers to that," Calyx replied, standing beside her. The core's energy surged, the strain audible in the air. A series of explosions echoed through the archives, each one sending a thrill of adrenaline through their veins. It was working. They were actually doing it. As the androids drew closer, their movements became more erratic, the overload wreaking havoc on their systems. Calyx and Zadra watched as their mechanical pursuers finally collapsed, the threat disarmed. For a moment, the silence was overwhelming, the kind that only came after chaos. Calyx let out a shaky breath, feeling the weight of everything they'd just done settle over him. "Well, that was something," Zadra said, shaking her head as if to clear it. Yeah, Calyx agreed, glancing at the remains of their foes. Remind me never to let things get this bad again. Only if you remind me to stop following you into these messes. Calyx grinned, despite everything. Deal. They stood there for a moment, savoring the victory, however temporary. The Celestials were still out there, still a threat, but for now they'd won a small, crucial battle. Ready to get out of here before the place decides to implode? Zadra asked, gesturing towards the exit. Lead the way, Calyx replied, following her out. He had no idea what the future held, what more the Celestials might throw at them. But as they left the infinite archives, one thing was for certain. They'd face whatever came next together, with all the grit, humor, and defiance they could muster. The infinite archives might have been marketed as a vault of knowledge, but right now it was more like a sepulchre of shattered dreams and smoldering electronics. Piles of disassembled androids littered the corridors, their mechanical innards exposed like some perverse anatomy lesson. But even as Calyx and Zadra maneuvered through the wreckage, it was hard to feel victorious. More like cockroaches that had managed to scuttle away when the light flicked on. Calyx wiped a fresh layer of sweat from his brow, his skin already glistening like a hyperactive disco ball. So Zadra, remind me again why we didn't just blow this place up and be done with it. Because, dear Calyx, Zadra replied, her voice dripping with sarcasm, our self-preservation instincts kicked in around the same time we realized imploding with the archives wasn't on today's menu. The echoes of approaching metallic footsteps were as persistent as bad credit, signaling that the remaining androids weren't quite ready to clock out. The Celestials, those smug bastards, had a way of turning an average Tuesday into the last scene of every bad sci-fi movie, complete with the existential dread and questionable CGI. Calyx, if we're going to get poetic about how screwed we are, Zadra began, inspecting a dented memory cube, I'll need something stronger than optimism. Say napalm. Napalm's a bit dramatic, Calyx replied, fiddling with a control panel that looked like it had been designed by a committee of sadists. I was thinking more along the lines of surviving till Happy Ior. Ever the optimist, she remarked, nudging a lifeless android aside with a boot. Except the closest thing we've got to Happy Ior involves hoping not to get vaporized. The control panel flickered with a weak glow, like an old man trying to get out of bed. All right, we can use this to reroute some power to the auxiliary systems, Calyx explained, punching commands into the console like a desperate gambler at a slot machine. Buy us some time. Time is money and we're broke, Zadra muttered, glancing down the corridor. She could almost smell the burnt circuits in the air, a metallic tang that seemed oddly comforting in its familiarity. Got any bright ideas that don't involve us becoming crispy critters? Calyx thought for a moment, tapping his chin with a grease-stained finger. Well, there's the small armory and hidden treasures of human ingenuity. If we're lucky, it might have something more potent than harsh language. Great. So we arm ourselves with relics and hope the androids have a fear of antiques, Zadra quipped, already moving towards the armory. As they navigated the maze of corridors, the oppressive silence of the archives was broken only by the occasional clang of distant metal. Each step was a reminder that they were outgunned, outnumbered, and out of options. Hey, you ever think, Calyx started, his voice echoing slightly, what if we don't make it? What if this is it? Zadra shot him a sideways glance. Calyx, if I wanted a pep talk, I would have asked a motivational poster. But since we're here, let's just focus on not becoming footnotes in the archives. Ah, the eternal optimist, Calyx said with a grin, though the mirth didn't quite reach his eyes. All right, let's see what goodies the past has gifted us. The armory was a dusty, neglected corner of the archives, filled with relics that had seen better days or epochs. Among the clutter were weapons from humanity's golden age of paranoia. Calyx picked up a rifle that looked like it could double as a battering ram. This looks promising, Calyx said, examining the ancient firearm with a mix of reverence and skepticism. Think it'll work? Zadra shrugged, picking up a grenade that had more rust than metal. If it doesn't, we can always throw it at them and hope they trip. That's the spirit, Calix said, cradling the rifle like a long-lost friend. We'll either go down fighting or leave one hell of a mess. With their newfound arsenal, they doubled back to the control room, ready to make what would likely be their final stand. The odds were stacked higher than a politician's promises, but that had never stopped them before. "You ready for this?" Calix asked, his voice a bit steadier than he felt. Zadra nodded, her expression a mix of determination and grim resolve. "I've been ready since the day we stepped foot in this mausoleum of hopelessness." Calix chuckled, though it sounded more like a cough. "All right then, let's show these tin cans that humans aren't just good at dying." The androids were closing in, their clanking footsteps echoing like a death march. Calix and Zadra took their positions, weapons at the ready, minds steeled for the confrontation ahead. The first wave appeared at the end of the corridor, a mass of metal limbs and unblinking eyes. Calix squeezed the trigger, the rifle kicking back against his shoulder with a satisfying thud. The shot hit home, sending the lead android sprawling to the ground. "So far, so good," Zadra said, lobbing the grenade with a practiced ease that belied the tension in her voice. The explosion was a beautiful thing if one had a penchant for chaos and fiery destruction. "That's one way to clear a room," Calix remarked, reloading with a speed born of desperation. "Yeah, well, let's hope they don't have reinforcements on speed dial," Zadra replied, her words punctuated by the sharp retorts of gunfire. The fight was brutal, each android down replaced by two more, as if they were multiplying out of sheer spite. But Calix and Zadra held their ground, each pull of the trigger a testament to their stubborn will to survive. "We're running low," Zadra warned, her voice tight with strain. "Tell me something I don't know," Calix shot back, squinting through the haze of smoke and debris. "Like where the reset button for all this crap is." The second wave came in harder, their numbers overwhelming. The armory's gifts were running dry, and the androids showed no sign of giving up. Calix could feel the tide turning, a sinking realization settling in his gut like bad space food. "Zadra, if we don't make it out of this," Calix started, but she cut him off with a sharp look. "Save the goodbyes for later," she said, her tone brooking no argument. "We're not dead yet." The last clip clicked into place, a hollow sound that echoed through the endless corridors. They traded a glance, unspoken words passing between them, grit, defiance, a shared history of battles fought and won. "All right," Calix said, his voice a low growl. "If we're going down, let's make it memorable." The android surged forward, a relentless tide of metal and fury. Calix and Zadra met them head-on, every shot a defiant stand against the inevitable. In the chaos of battle, Calix's mind wandered to the past, to why they were here in the first place. A forgotten promise, a desperate attempt to protect something greater than themselves. But now it felt like fighting for the sake of fighting, an endless cycle of struggle with no clear end. "Calix!" Zadra's shout brought him back to the present, where an android was charging, a spiked appendage poised to strike. Instinct kicked in and Calix sidestepped, bringing the rifle up in a fluid motion. The shot was clean, sending the android crashing to the floor. "Thanks," he grunted, wiping sweat from his eyes. "I owe you one." "Add it to the tab," Zadra replied, a ghost of a smile playing on her lips despite the circumstances. The tide was turning again, this time against them. The androids were learning, adapting something that shouldn't have been possible, yet here they were. Calix felt the weight of it all bearing down on him like a black hole. "Think we can hold them off long enough to make a run for it?" Zadra asked, her voice strained but steady. "Honestly, I don't know," Calix admitted, his gaze fixed on the approaching horde. "But I'm not about to give up without a fight." The androids were nearly upon them, their mechanical movements as relentless as the march of time. Calix could feel his grip on hope slipping, the inevitability of their situation bearing down on him. But then something unexpected happened. The lights flickered, a brief, stuttering pulse that seemed to ripple through the archives. The androids hesitated, their movements faltering as if caught in some unseen web. "What the hell?" Zadra muttered, glancing around in confusion. Calix's mind raced, connecting dots that hadn't been there moments before. The overload, he realized, a flicker of hope sparking in his chest. It's affecting the whole system. The androids were slowing, their coordination unraveling like a poorly knit sweater. Calix and Zadra took advantage of the hesitation, their shots finding targets with renewed purpose. "For once, when something breaks, it works in our favor," Zadra said, a note of disbelief in her voice. "Don't jinx it," Calix replied, though he couldn't keep the grin off his face. The androids were crumbling, their systems collapsing under the strain of the overload. It was a sight both beautiful and terrifying, a testament to their ingenuity and the thin line between victory and annihilation. As the last android fell, the silence was deafening, broken only by the distant hum of the remaining systems. Calix and Zadra stood amidst the wreckage, their breaths mingling with the dust and smoke. "We did it," Calix said, the words sounding strange and foreign in the aftermath of chaos. "Yeah," Zadra agreed, a weary smile tugging at her lips. "But don't start celebrating. We've still got a bunch of celestial jerks to deal with." Calix nodded, the weight of their victory tempered by the knowledge of what lay ahead. The archives might be safe for now, but the larger threat remained, a looming shadow on the horizon. "Ready to keep fighting the good fight?" Calix asked, offering a hand to Zadra. Zadra took it, her grip firm and unyielding. "Always," she said, her voice carrying the promise of defiance and resilience. As they left the command hub, the path ahead was uncertain, fraught with danger and challenges. But they were ready. Together, they'd face whatever the universe threw their way, armed with wry humor, unyielding determination, and a healthy disdain for impending doom. Calix glanced back at the archives, their temporary sanctuary amidst the vast emptiness of space. "Let's go make some trouble," he said with a grin, and together they vanished into the corridors, ready for the next chapter of their grim saga. Calix Marrow wiped the sweat from his brow with a grimy sleeve, the acrid scent of burnt circuits still hanging in the air like a bad decision. He glanced at Zadra as they both leaned against the command hub, trying to steady their breaths and their nerves. The androids were down, but the real fight was just beginning. Funny how space had a way of serving up one disaster after another, like a cosmic buffet of misery. Zadra was hunched over a console, her fingers dancing across the keys with a speed that hinted at desperation. "This damn thing's older than dirt, but I'm seeing something weird," she muttered, half to herself. "What's that, Zadra?" Calix asked, eyeing the tangled mess of wires and screens that made up their so-called command center. It looked like a rabid spaghetti monster had thrown up, but somehow it was their lifeline. "There's a code embedded in the data, hidden pretty well too," she replied, her voice tinged with the kind of excitement that usually comes from finding a 20-credit chip in an old jacket. Calix leaned over her shoulder, squinting at the holographic display. "What kind of code are we talking here? The lead us to our doom kind or the save our asses kind?" "Hard to say, but it seems to relate to the Celestials' control over the androids," Zadra said, her eyes scanning lines of gibberish that, to Calix, might as well have been ancient Sumerian. "If I'm reading this right, and I'm usually right, we might have a way to screw with their signal." "Now you're talking," Calix grinned, feeling a sliver of hope wedge its way into his chest. "Let's see if we can't pull the rug out from under those celestial bastards." Zadra shot him a wry smile. "It's a long shot, but hell, long shots are all we've got in this hellhole," Calix nodded. "All right, let's gather the crew. We've got ourselves a plan that's crazier than a Martian on moonshine." With renewed vigor, they made their way to the central gathering point, where Griggs and the rest of the team were licking their wounds and counting their blessings, what few they had left. The infinite archives might have been a mausoleum of forgotten dreams, but today it was the staging ground for something bold, something audacious, something that might just get them all killed. "Listen up," Calix called, his voice carrying the kind of authority that came from having nothing left to lose. Zadra found us a potential weakness in the Celestials' hold over the androids. It's a long shot, but it might just turn the tide. Griggs, the eternal pessimist, folded his arms with a frown. And what's to say this doesn't backfire and leave us with more scrap metal than a junkyard? Zadra piped up, her sarcasm cutting through the tension like a hot knife. Well, Griggs, unlike your love life, this plan actually has potential. The team chuckled, a welcome break in the oppressive atmosphere. Even Griggs couldn't help but crack a smile, albeit a reluctant one. Sometimes, humor was all that kept them from falling into the abyss. Calyx laid out the plan, a mishmash of tech jargon and wishful thinking that involved disrupting the Celestials' signal long enough to regain control of the androids. It was risky, dangerous, and entirely dependent on everything going right, a prospect about as likely as a politician keeping a promise. So, we hack the signal, take back control, and use the androids against them. One of the techs asked, his voice tinged with both hope and skepticism. That's the idea, Calyx said, rubbing the back of his neck. Of course, there's a good chance we end up turning them into homicidal maniacs again. But hey, nothing ventured, nothing gained, right? The team nodded, a collective resolve settling over them. They'd all seen the odds and spat in their faces before. This was just another day at the office, albeit one with higher stakes than usual. Zadra got to work, her fingers a blur as she navigated the archaic system. Each keystroke echoed like a drumbeat, marking the passage of time as they teetered on the brink of disaster. How much longer? Calyx asked, his voice low enough to avoid adding unnecessary pressure but loud enough to convey urgency. Just a few more minutes, Zadra replied, not pausing in her work. Keep your pants on, Calyx. I know patience isn't your strong suit, he snorted. Patience is overrated. Action's where the fun's at. Meanwhile, Griggs and a few others secured the perimeter, setting up makeshift barricades and adjusting the power flow to keep the androids under. It was a patch job, more duct tape and hope than anything solid, but it would have to do. The lights flickered again, a reminder that they were dancing on a knife's edge. Calyx tried to ignore the sinking feeling in his gut, the one that whispered of failure and doom. Finally, Zadra leaned back, a triumphant gleam in her eye. Got it, we've got a window. Let's make these celestial assholes regret ever crossing us. Calyx pumped a fist. All right, people, let's show them what happens when you piss off a bunch of determined humans. Griggs took up a position by the door, his weapon ready. Here goes nothing. If this works, drinks are on me. Calyx chuckled. If this works, I'll buy the whole damn bar. The team sprang into action, each member a cog in the makeshift machine they'd assembled. Zadra's fingers flew over the keys, a dance of desperation and determination, as she initiated the signal disruption. Power spike incoming, she warned. This might get bumpy. The room shuddered, a low rumble passing through the floor as the system struggled to accommodate the sudden surge. Sparks flew, and somewhere in the distance, the unmistakable sound of metal rending metal echoed through the corridors. Come on, Calyx muttered, his heart hammering in his chest. Every second felt like an eternity, the weight of their survival hanging in the balance. Then, like a miracle wrapped in a nightmare, the screens lit up with a cascade of data. The androids were responding, their systems rebooting under the new directives. It was happening. Against all odds, it was actually happening. They're taking the bait, Zadra announced, a grin splitting her face. We've got control. Calyx let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. All right, team. Time to give our metal friends some new marching orders. With a few deft commands, Zadra reprogrammed the androids to turn against the Celestials' forces. It was a bold move with potential consequences that could haunt them, but it was the kind of risk they thrived on. Griggs, get ready, Calyx called. We're about to have company. Griggs grunted, his expression grim but determined. Bring it on. I've been itching for a fight. The first wave of androids surged forward, now under their command. It was a strange sight, watching the mechanical warriors turn on their former masters, a delicious irony not lost on any of them. The corridors erupted into chaos, a cacophony of metal on metal, interspersed with the occasional shout as the Celestials realized they'd lost control. Calix and Zadra watched from the command hub, directing the battle like maestros of destruction. "It's working," Zadra said, her voice a mix of disbelief and delight. "They're actually doing it." "Yeah," Calix replied, a grin tugging at his lips. "But let's not break out the champagne just yet. There's still a long way to go." The fight raged on, a brutal dance of survival and defiance. The androids tore through the Celestials' defenses with ruthless efficiency, a testament to the ingenuity of those who dared to play God. Griggs led the charge, his rifle barking orders that echoed down the corridors. "Keep pushing. We've got them on the run." Calix felt the thrill of victory inching closer, tantalizingly within reach. But he knew better than to celebrate prematurely. In space, victory was as slippery as a greased-up eel and twice as hard to hold onto. Zadra nudged him with her elbow, a smirk on her face. "Looks like your crazy plan might actually work." "Yeah," he said, a warm glow of satisfaction spreading through him. "Guess even a broken clock is right twice a day." The Celestials, caught off guard by the sudden betrayal of their mechanical minions, were faltering. Their once imposing presence diminished, reduced to a desperate scramble for control. Calix felt a surge of adrenaline, the kind that only came when the odds were stacked against them and they were winning anyway. It was intoxicating and dangerous, a combination he knew all too well. "All right, people," Calix shouted over the din. "Let's finish this." The fight pushed towards its crescendo, a whirlwind of chaos and combat that left destruction in its wake. The Celestials were retreating, their forces in disarray, and the archives were alive with the triumphant clamor of victory. In the aftermath, as the dust settled and the echoes faded, Calix and Zadra stood amidst the wreckage, their breaths mingling with the thinning smoke. They'd done it. Against all odds, they'd turned the tide and claimed a victory that had seemed impossible. "Well," Zadra said, a weary smile playing on her lips, "we might actually live to see tomorrow." Calix nodded, his gaze sweeping over the battered remnants of their battleground. "Yeah, but let's not get too comfortable. Tomorrow's another day, and I'm sure the universe has plenty more shit to throw at us." With a final glance at the command hub, now silent and still, they turned to face the path ahead. It was uncertain, fraught with danger and challenges, but they didn't care. Together, they'd face whatever came next with the same irreverence and defiance that had carried them this far. Calix clapped a hand on Zadra's shoulder, a gesture of camaraderie and gratitude. "Ready to keep shaking things up?" Zadra smirked, her eyes glinting with mischief and resolve. "Always. Let's go raise some hell." And with that, they stepped forward, leaving the ruins of their latest triumph behind as they embarked on the next stage of their grimdark adventure. Because in the end, it wasn't just about surviving. It was about living defiantly in the face of a universe that seemed determined to beat them down. And if they had anything to say about it, they'd do so with a smile and a middle finger raised to the stars. The infinite archives buzzed with an electricity far beyond the flickering lights and sparking consoles. It was an electricity born of chaos, triumph, and a fair bit of snarky banter. Calix Marrow, the man with optimism as misguided as a cat in a zero-gravity room, stood at the helm of a plan that was already proving to be as unpredictable as a politician's promise. "All right, folks," Calix announced, his voice straddling the line between confidence and sheer madness. "We're in the belly of the beast now. Let's make sure it's not our last supper." Zadra Flux, his partner in crime and sarcasm, was still riding the high from their recent victory. "Just remember, Calix, if this all goes to hell, I'm blaming you. Mainly because it'll be your fault." Griggs snorted from his position near the barricades. "If this goes to hell, blame's not gonna matter much when we're all space dust." The team snickered, a chorus of gallows humor echoing through the command hub. It was the soundtrack of survival, the kind that kept you sane when the universe seemed hell-bent on grinding you into nothing more than an anecdote in a cautionary tale. Okay, Zadra, Calyx said, rubbing his hands together like a mad scientist about to unleash their latest abomination. Let's get those androids partying to our tune. Zadra's fingers danced over the console, each keystroke a calculated step in a dangerous waltz with fate. You know, Calyx, I never thought I'd spend my career arguing with machines that could kill me with a sneeze. If it makes you feel better, Calyx replied, they're probably allergic to our bullshit too. The team was a well-oiled machine of misfits and mavericks, each one contributing to the grand, if slightly deranged, plan. While Zadra worked her magic on the console, Griggs and the others found ways to fortify their position, using whatever they could scavenge from the remnants of humanity's once great vault of knowledge. Got any more of those memory cubes, Griggs? Zadra asked without looking up, eyes glued to the streams of data. Griggs rummaged through a pile of discarded tech, muttering curses at each reminder of how much junk surrounded them. I've got enough cubes here to start a museum. No promises on their content, though. Could just be old cat videos for all I know. Wouldn't that be a relic? Calyx chuckled. Endless resources spent preserving feline antics. Maybe that's the secret to peace. Less war, more catnip. The lights flickered ominously, a reminder that their already tenuous grasp on the situation was being held together by little more than luck and bravado. Calyx, we're almost there, Zadra informed, her voice taut with focus. Just need a little more time. Time's one thing we might not have, Griggs pointed out, checking his weapon, his stance a picture of grim determination. Intel says the Celestials are regrouping. They'll be on us any minute. Calyx ran a hand through his hair, shooting a glance at the ceiling, where it felt like the stars themselves were watching with bated breath. Well, let's hope they're not big fans of synchronized dancing. Otherwise, we're screwed. No sooner had the words left his mouth than the console emitted a beep that was equal parts encouraging and terrifying. Zadra looked up, satisfaction etched on her features. We've got control. The androids are ours to command. Perfect, Calyx declared, the grin on his face reminiscent of a gambler who just hit the jackpot with his last credit. Let's send them a little surprise package. Commands were input with precision as Zadra manipulated the android's programming. The once mindless automatons now had a new target, and it wasn't the humans huddled in the archives. Griggs, how's it looking out there? Calyx called, peering over to see him watching the corridors with hawk-like vigilance. Looks like the androids are making their move, Griggs replied. And I think they're actually smiling. Or that might just be the low battery light. The cacophony of metal clashing with metal filled the air as the androids turned on their former masters, each step they took echoing with the sound of betrayal and retribution. The Celestials, so used to commanding absolute obedience, were finding themselves on the wrong side of a machine revolution. Serves them right, Zadra muttered, her attention again on the console. Maybe next time they'll think twice before messing with a bunch of humans who are too stubborn to die quietly. Calyx nodded, the adrenaline of victory washing over him like a wave. Here's hoping they remember today as the moment they lost to a ragtag bunch of space misfits. The battle raged in the corridors, a symphony of destruction that resonated through the archives. The Celestials were unprepared, their forces in disarray as their mechanical soldiers turned against them with an efficiency that was almost poetic. Remind me to send a thank you note to whoever designed these androids, Calyx quipped, leaning back as the command hub filled with the sounds of a war being won. Should we include a PS about making them less murdery next time? Zadra suggested, her grin mirroring his. Absolutely. But let's also remind them that humans are best left underestimated. Makes for a better story when we kick their asses. The tide was turning, the once imposing Celestials now on the back foot, scrambling to regain a semblance of control as the archives echoed with the laughter and cries of victory. Griggs led the charge, his weapon barking commands that the androids seemed all too eager to follow. Push forward, he shouted, waving a hand to direct the advancing androids. Let's show these celestial bastards what they really signed up for. The battle was a whirlwind of chaos and calculated risks, the kind of deadly dance that had become second nature to those who thrived on the razor's edge between life and oblivion. They fought not just for survival, but for the sheer satisfaction of proving that even in the darkest corners of space, humanity's indomitable spirit would shine through. Calix and Zadra watched the unfolding spectacle from their perch in the command hub, directing the androids with a mix of strategic genius and utter disbelief that their plan was actually working. "This is it," Calix said, feeling the sweet taste of triumph on his tongue. "We've got them." Zadra nodded, her eyes alight with pride, and without even a motivational speech. "Maybe we're getting the hang of this whole rebellion thing. Hey, I'll leave the speeches for when we're drinking celebratory booze," Calix replied, his grin broadening. "Right now, let's focus on keeping our skins intact." As the Celestials faltered, the androids pressed their advantage, pushing their former masters back step by step. It was a victory born from desperation and defiance, a testament to what could be achieved when humanity's back was against the wall. The corridors were a battlefield, littered with the debris of shattered illusions and broken dreams. But amidst the chaos, there was a sense of hope, a flicker of something that might just be enough to carry them through. "Looks like they are retreating," Griggs reported, his voice crackling over the intercom. "We've done it, Calix. We've actually done it." Calix let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, relief flooding through him as the tension of battle finally began to wane. "Good work, everyone. Let's regroup and make sure we're ready for whatever comes next." The team gathered in the command hub, weary but victorious, their faces etched with the marks of battle and the shadows of a struggle that had pushed them to their limits. "Well," Zadra said, leaning back against the console with a contented sigh, "I suppose we can add beating a superior alien force to our resumes now." Calix chuckled, the warmth of camaraderie and shared triumph wrapping around them like a comforting embrace. "Yeah, but let's not get too cozy. Something tells me this isn't the last we've heard of the Celestials." Griggs nodded, cleaning his weapon with the care of a soldier who knew that peace was always temporary. "They'll regroup, and when they do, we'll be ready." The team shared a moment of silence, each of them lost in their thoughts, their eyes staring into a future that was as uncertain as ever. But beneath the surface, there was a flicker of something more, a sense of unity and purpose that had been forged in the fires of adversity. "So, what's next?" one of the techs asked, breaking the silence with a question that hung in the air like a challenge. Calix looked around at his team, the ragtag group of survivors who had become more than just allies. They were a family, bound by the shared experiences of a battle that had pushed them to their limits and beyond. "Next," Calix said, his voice steady with resolve, "we prepare. Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's that the universe doesn't like to be shown up. And I have a feeling it's going to throw something even bigger our way." Zadra grinned, her eyes glinting with mischief and determination. "Bring it on. We've survived this long. I say we keep pissing off the universe until it gets tired of losing." The team laughed, a sound that was equal parts relief and defiance. They had faced the odds and come out on top, and now they were ready for whatever the universe dared to throw at them next. As the dust settled and the echoes of battle faded into memory, they stood together, united in their resolve to continue the fight. The infinite archives, once a tomb of forgotten knowledge, had become a symbol of their resilience, a testament to the power of human ingenuity and determination. And as they looked to the stars, they knew that whatever lay ahead, they would face it together, with humor, defiance, and just a hint of madness. After all, in a universe determined to break them, what better way to fight back than with a smile and a raised middle finger? The infinite archives looked like they'd hosted a party for chaos and forgotten to clean up. Wires dangled like the entrails of a mechanical beast, and the smell of burnt circuitry lingered in the air, a scent that had become unnervingly familiar. But there was something else, too, a feeling Calix's marrow couldn't quite shake. Could it be optimism? Like an idiot, he dared to hope. Well, I think that went rather well, Calyx remarked, surveying the wreckage with a mix of pride and exhaustion. Nothing says success like a library reduced to a post-apocalyptic wasteland. Zadra Flux was still at the console, fingers dancing over the keys like an overcaffeinated pianist. We just handed a bunch of killer androids their metaphorical pink slips. I'd call that a good day's work. Think the Celestials will send us a thank you card, Griggs chimed in, swapping the magazine on his blaster with a satisfying click. Or maybe just a cease and desist, Calyx laughed, a sound as rough as sandpaper. If the universe had a complaint department, we'd be on their speed dial. They were standing where the heart of civilization's knowledge had once pulsed with life. Now it was just the aftermath of an android mutiny. The humans and their newly freed metallic comrades had a simple task ahead of them: pick up the pieces and pretend they knew what they were doing. Easier said than done. "All right, folks," Calyx called, drawing the attention of both flesh and circuitry. "Let's get this place back to something resembling order." And by order, I mean less of a death trap. The androids, now deprogrammed from their previous life of subservience to the Celestials, stood around like lost pets. A few had started to assist, albeit clumsily, in clearing debris. Watching one attempt to fold a chair like it was an origami project was oddly endearing. "You know," Zadra said, "they might be more useful as paperweights." "True," Calyx replied, scratching his chin. "But they do have opposable thumbs, and that puts them one step ahead of most bureaucrats." Griggs snorted, adjusting his gear with the care of a soldier who knew peace was nothing but a pause between disasters. "So, what now? Do we teach them the subtle art of sarcasm?" "I think that might break them," Zadra commented dryly, eyeing an android that had just discovered the joys of stacking memory cubes into a precarious tower. The rebuilding effort was as organized as a squared rave. Humans and androids worked side by side, sharing tools and occasionally a laugh. Well, the humans laughed. The androids just mimicked the sound like parrots learning swear words. Calyx watched the scene with a sense of bewildered pride. They were doing it. Against all odds, they were turning a dystopian mess into something that, if you squinted hard enough, looked like hope, or at least a reasonable facsimile. Zadra approached, wiping her brow with the back of her hand. "So, Calyx, what's the plan when the Celestials eventually come knocking again?" He shrugged, watching an android carefully slot a cube into a console port. "We get another plan, probably with more explosions and fewer existential crises." Griggs leaned over, voice low and conspiratorial. "I hear existential crises are buy one, get one free these days." "Only if you're lucky," Zadra added. Their camaraderie was a lifeline in the swirling void of uncertainty. They had won a battle, sure, but the war, that was anyone's guess. Still, as far as victories went, this one tasted pretty damn sweet. The day slowly bled into what passed for night in the archives, the artificial lighting dimming to a soothing, if slightly eerie, glow. Calyx found himself leaning against a console, the chill of the metal seeping through his clothes. "You know," he began, turning to Zadra, "I think we might actually be on the verge of something big here." She raised an eyebrow, her expression a perfect blend of skepticism and amusement. "The verge of what?" "Finding out androids make terrible interior decorators," he chuckled. "Unity, between humans and machines. A new era, maybe." Zadra looked out at the mismatched group of humans and androids, their movements disjointed yet strangely harmonious. "Well, if adapting badly to change is the hallmark of humanity, I'd say the androids are fitting in just fine." "Exactly," Calyx said, as if he just discovered the key to the universe. "And they don't even complain about Mondays." "Give them time," Griggs quipped, wandering over to join them. "Once they figure out how to dread the start of a work week, we'll know we've really made progress." Calyx scanned the room, seeing the determination etched on every face, metal or otherwise. This was more than survival. This was a chance to redefine what it meant to work together, to coexist despite their differences. And if they managed to piss off the Celestials in the process, well, that was just icing on the cake. "So what do we call this new alliance?" Zadra asked, leaning against the console beside him. "Humans and androids in a weird, dysfunctional family reunion." "I dunno," Calyx replied, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. "How about the Fellowship of the Irate? Or maybe people and things that go beep in the night?" "Catchy," Griggs said, nodding approvingly. "Trademark that before the Celestials steal it for their next propaganda campaign." The flicker of shared laughter rippled through the room, binding them together in a way that was both fragile and resilient. They were disparate parts of a puzzle that didn't quite fit, yet somehow they were making it work. As the last remnants of chaos were swept away, the archives began to resemble a place of learning once again. Maybe not as grand as it had been, but close enough. The androids, free from their chains, stood shoulder to shoulder with their human counterparts, silent sentinels of a future that was theirs to shape. Calyx took a deep breath, the stale air of the archives filling his lungs. "I have a feeling we're going to be okay." Zadra gave him a sidelong glance, a smile playing at her lips. "You sure about that, or are you just hoping the universe doesn't have any more curveballs up its sleeve?" "Bit of both," he admitted, a grin stretching across his face. "But if it does, we'll be ready, with sarcasm and blasters." Griggs raised his weapon in mock salute. "To sarcasm and blasters." The toast was echoed by the others, a chorus of defiant voices that dared the universe to test them. They were survivors, yes, but more importantly, they were stubborn. A trait that, in the vast emptiness of space, was worth more than all the starlight in the galaxy. As they went back to work, Calyx felt a warmth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with the flickering overhead lights. It was hope, as unexpected and persistent as a bad rash. But it was theirs, and in a universe that seemed hell-bent on extinguishing it, that was enough. The stories of their triumph would echo through the galaxy, a testament to the indomitable human spirit and the power of unity. They'd shown the Celestials, and anyone else paying attention, that humanity was not to be underestimated. Sitting against the console, Calyx watched his team, his family, carry on with their work, every action a defiance of the dark future that had been laid at their feet. They were building something new, something powerful, and he couldn't wait to see where it would lead. "Zadra," he said, watching the androids attempt to organize themselves into something resembling a formation, "do you think they'll ever write a textbook about us?" She glanced at him, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "If they do, let's hope it's not under the how not to section." He laughed, the sound mingling with the quiet hum of machines. "You know what? I can live with that." And so, amidst the sputtering consoles and the scars of battle, they carried on. Humans and androids united in purpose, driven by the shared goal of turning a grim reality into a future worth fighting for. Together, they faced the stars with a mix of defiance and hope, ready to take on whatever the universe dared to throw their way, one cynical observation at a time.